there's one video to watch to understand the U.S. trade deficit and whether President Trump's trade war will lower that deficit, this is it. Unless you're a real student of economics, this video will probably surprise you, and I think it will make sense to you as well. In our earlier segment, we made the point that many successful advanced economies, including the U.S., have trade deficits, so maybe trade deficits aren't that bad for you. Now, for those who follow the trade issue a bit, that comment probably brings to mind two countries, China and Germany, both of which have large trade surpluses. Now, we have another video on China. This one addresses Germany and in many ways is more important, more useful, because Germany is so much like the U.S., more so than just about any other country out there. For one thing, unlike China, Germany isn't a low-income country. Among major economies, Germany's per capita GDP second only to the U.S. Germany has a highly advanced and competitive economy with global market leaders in most sectors. Yet, and this is crucial, as a percentage of GDP, Germany tends to run a rather large trade surplus, even higher than China's. So what gives with Germany? Why the big difference on trade? We'll do a quick comparison, and I think you'll find this is actually an interesting look at how two countries, the US and Germany, can be so much alike and yet different in critical ways, ways that impact the trade balance. First, note that while the US has 7 of the 10 largest tech companies in the world, Germany has 0. If we expand to the top 25, the US has 16, Germany has 1. Obviously, a trade surplus does not necessarily translate into a high-tech advantage. Now, this disparity helps explain why overall the market capitalization of America's stock market is above 160% of GDP, more than twice what it is for Germany. Now, that's a huge difference for countries that are so much alike. Let's call that the wealth factor. Here's the second point. America's government debt is much larger than Germany's, the result of the U.S. government consistently spending more than it takes in. We could call that the debt factor. Next, we have the savings rate. We see that Germany's is much higher than America's, the savings factor. All of this leads to our final graph, our main point. America has more, borrows more, and saves less. It all adds up to the fact that the U.S., drumroll please, and boom, there it is. America spends more, way more than Germany. 68% of GDP to 53%. That's a 15% difference, which is even bigger than the gap in the trade deficit. The main point we've been making is that spending is a key component of the trade deficit. Germany might be the best argument, yet Germany's tariffs aren't particularly high, with an average tariff rate, what's called the simplified average applied tariff rate, of 5.2% for the EU versus 3.5% for the US. Fairly low in both cases and not a huge difference. Now, the EU has a 10% tariff on cars, but the US has a 25% tariff on pickup trucks. And don't forget, pickup trucks are a huge part of the US auto market. The difference in trade restrictions is tiny compared to the difference in consumer spending, which is huge. If the US wants to cut the trade deficit with Germany, nothing would be as effective as decreasing spending in the US. Cut the budget deficit, raise interest rates, or you could get the Germans to spend more, which in fact the US has been urging Germany to do. Either way, action on the spending side, not the tariff or trade side, is much more likely to impact the trade deficit with Germany. One last point worth repeating. In the beginning of this video, we said that if you want to understand the trade deficit, this is the one video you should watch. This is because Germany and the US have so much in common. Yet their financial management is very different, which in turn has a huge impact on things like the trade balance. This shows that when assessing economic issues like the trade deficit, you can't take a narrow view. You have to see the big picture, consider all the variables. And in this case, if you don't take the spending side of the equation into account, if you just focus on trade and tariffs, that kind of thing, you won't change that U.S. trade deficit, or at least you won't change it in a way that is actually good for the economy.